Let's go across to our guest joining us. Dr. Azriel Bermant is Senior Researcher, Institute of International Relations, Prague. He's joining us from Jerusalem. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat is former Indian diplomat. Professor Max Abrahams is international security expert. Nadav Steinman is chairman of the board of the International Legal Forum. Nadav, why don't I begin with you? We've seen many justifications of this terror attack on Israel come forth. And it is not anybody's contention and certainly not my contention that this is a very simple issue. But I want to understand from you, regardless of the past history between Palestine and Israel or Hamas and Israel, can there be any justification for what we've witnessed over the weekend, the attack on Israel?
I want to ask a simple question. Can you, and picture this. If there was a justification, that justification has to be looked at in the eyes of babies and toddlers put in cages. You would have to be able to say that, and every report that you showed, and every demonstrator that you showed, every single one of them would have to be able to justify their actions for asking for more murder and death, and say that justification in the eyes of those toddlers currently in cages in Gaza. Is that a possibility? Is that any reasonable human being can do that? Is any humanitarian view other than saying the deplore this behavior? Don't talk to me. Talk to those babies. Talk to the 85-year-old women who were dragged on the street. Look at those faces and say, I am justifying the behavior that is caused to you and the actions that we did to you. Can you say that to a child put in a cage? All grown adults can say what they want, but justify that behavior by looking at the cages of children that were kidnapped out of the arms of their children. I'm sorry. There is no justification for these kinds of actions. I am not here to talk about a side. If we're talking about justification of actions, it's deplorable on any human scale.
And yet there are those justifications coming in. Nadav, I want you to respond one more time before I open this up. There are justifications not just coming from, obviously, Arab countries who support Palestine. At the same time, they want to draw a distinction between Hamas and Palestine. And obviously, they talk about how the brutalities that have been suffered by the Palestinian over a period of time, not just over the last 20 years, but over the last 70 years, for example, is why this has happened. That this was bound to happen, and this has happened because of the Israeli oppression. But what I also don't understand is that how do you attack unarmed civilians in your fight against an oppressive force? And then how do you still argue that you should get sympathy for what has transpired? It is mind-boggling to separate Hamas and Palestine, even if I was to take that argument at one level, but to support Hamas attack in itself is coming across as a shock. And this has come from countries, this has come from think tanks, this has come from academics. Some major universities in the world have done this.
I find that as human beings, we must be humans first. We must take our political agenda second. I cannot accept any justification for these kinds of heinous actions. If you do, if anybody does, I don't care what side of any political argument you are, if you are accepting that kind of justification of that kind of random slaughter, then you are acting like Nazis and their sympathizers. I see no other way to describe it. And I'm not being overly dramatic here. I'm just trying to talk about from a concept of our history of humans in the past 100 years. We've witnessed World War II. We've witnessed the crimes against humanity. We witnessed murder and slaughter. We witnessed all these things. How can we say there is ever a justification? We know as a matter of law, and I am a lawyer who defends Israel, I am saying that as a matter of international law, they have broken every single potential law there is in the act of war. I am saying that the world community has come together years ago and offered what we agree can be acts of war, legitimate acts of war. None of the acts by Hamas fall into any legitimate act of war as a matter of international law. It's every single thing that they have done is wrong. It is up to the world to say that. It's not just us sitting here or me sitting in my sealed room in Jerusalem because there have been attacks and more bombs are coming. I have to be in a secure place. It's not just about me. It's about what the world voice has to be on these issues. And these issues have to be brought to the forefront. We cannot accept the random slaughter of children, of old women. We cannot accept these. There is zero justification. You can be anti-Israel, but why do you have to be anti the killing and slaughter of children? Say that to the faces of those children. That's what I stand by.
Dr. Azriel Bermant, I want to come to you because the argument that has been given by those who have supported Hamas attack is that the Palestinians have suffered equally, if not worse, because of the Israeli quote occupation. Is that a justifiable response?
Oh, I agree with what Nadav said. I think that if you justifying the barbaric actions of Hamas, we're talking about mass slaughter of civilians, nearly 1,000 killed, abduction of women, elderly, children, which is a war crime, and dragging these dead bodies through the streets of Gaza. Even I should emphasize here that even organizations on the left, civil rights organizations, are strongly supporting the Palestinians, such as Breaking the Silence, for example, have made it clear that what Hamas has done is a war crime. It's a despicable action. There is no hope for humanity if we if anyone justifies the actions of Hamas, these actions by Hamas. That doesn't mean that the Palestinians haven't suffered, and certainly there is an ongoing occupation. We're talking about 55 years now since the Six-Day War of the West Bank. Although Gaza itself is not occupied by Israel, Israel does control the airspace and the borders for Gaza, but Israel does not occupy Gaza. West Bank, of course, it does occupy, but there is no excuse whatsoever, no justification for what Hamas did.
Yet there is justification coming in. So very quickly, why do you think that's happening? You mentioned human rights activists, groups, leftist organizations that stand for peace and against violence are doing it quite openly. So why do you think that's the case?
You're saying what? Are justify what Hamas has done, or
Yes.
criticizing?
They've justified Hamas's attack, or they have stood more on the side of Palestine after that Hamas attack. So why do you think that's happening? If it is so obvious to all of us that Hamas's actions cannot be justified, why do you think these groups are still doing so?
There are organizations, extreme organizations, that will support. You have there are organizations which have put themselves beyond the pale on the margins, which have, so we say, supported Hamas or shown some sympathy. But anyone who really cares about the Palestinians, who genuinely cares, and the Palestinian cause, the Palestinians have a right to their own state. They have a right. They should be able to enjoy the rights, their own political rights, in the same way that Israel enjoys its own right as a sovereign state. But if you're going to justify what Hamas has done, you're actually undermining the Palestinian cause. What they should be doing, those on the extremes I'm talking about here, those on the extremes should be saying Hamas has carried out a barbaric action. This is a war crime. This is a violation of the most basic human rights, and this is not going to help the Palestinians. There are plenty of other organizations, responsible organizations, that have condemned Hamas, but have at the same time condemned Israel's actions. For example, the building of settlements, annexation of Palestinian land. There have been settler attacks against Palestinians, innocent Palestinians. These must be condemned. But there's no question that Hamas has undermined the Palestinian cause.
Yes, and ultimately, many feel that it's going to be ordinary Palestinians who would suffer.